I'm back at it again with another Anthem guide. This is my Advanced Storm Positioning Guide. And in this video, I'm just going to be teaching you guys the fundamentals that I take into consideration as I'm playing the Storm and as I am, of course, positioning myself in the battlefield. Let's start off with fundamental number 1. So for the most part, when it comes down to playing Storm, I always want to position myself in areas where my weapons are going to be effective, but also my gear is going to be pretty effective as well. The good news is that a lot of the gear that the Storm has is actually really good for long ranges. This means that you can be really high in the air and you're still going to be able to be effective. The only problem with that is that sometimes it's not going to be ideal to your loadouts. So when it comes down to your positioning, you have to keep your loadouts in mind. For example, if I'm running 2 machine pistols and there's enemies down there, clearly my positioning isn't very good, right? Because the machine pistols are barely going to be hitting my targets. That's why with the Storm, I always like to run a secondary long-range weapon or 2 long-range weapons in general. It's all about, of course, how aggressive you want to be. And since sometimes I like to be really high in the air with the Storm, I like to, of course, equip my Siege Breaker and, of course, just shoot enemies from long distances with my Siege Breaker. And if I am, of course, in a close range scenario or a middle range scenario, I will be, of course, be using my Avenging Herald. So that's the first fundamental that I want to teach you guys when it comes down to Storm positioning. Just make sure that you keep your loadout in mind, because your loadout in Anthem, with the Storm specifically, is very important. Next fundamental that I have for you guys, always use your environment as cover. We're going to go a little bit deeper into this on the gameplay examples, but let's just do a quick showcase of what I mean real quick. Instead of being out here in the open and actually shooting these enemies when I have no protection at all whatsoever, I am going to be over here. Because when I'm in this position, I can get into cover as I'm charging up my gear. I can shoot my gear or my weapon, and then I can always go back to cover. This is a fundamental that is really important with the Storm, specifically if you want to be effective with him. Because sometimes, you know, let's say that a lot of enemies focus you down, you lose your shield, you're probably going to go down really quickly. So using your environment as cover is something that is very essential if you want to, of course, position yourself really well with the Storm Javelin. And the third fundamental is to always make sure that you adjust your positioning. So for example, let's say that there is a stone right here that is giving me cover. I'm going to, of course, finish off this enemy over here. I'm going to take cover behind the stone. I thought I wasn't going to kill that guy. I'm going to take cover behind the stone, but then I'm going to move on forward to this imaginary stone that is right here, that is also going to be giving me cover. That's usually what I like doing as I'm traversing the world and fighting enemies with the Storm. But enough about that. Let's get into the actual deep stuff that's going to teach you guys how to master Storm positioning, my combat analysis. Let's take a look at something as simple as knowing where to hover. So in this gameplay example, I'm choosing to hover next to this right wall. The reason why I'm choosing to hover in this position is because, number 1, I have a general view of all of the enemies that are in front of me. I can also view my teammates, and I'm also in an area where I can capitalize my abilities as well as my weapons. That's pretty obvious. What's not obvious, however, is that I chose to position myself in that right wall because I knew if enemies spawned on the far right for some reason, I was going to be able to have some protection. That's why knowing your environment with the Storm is really important. If you have sort of like a lay of the land, I guess you could say, you're going to be able to always position yourself for success on areas where you're going to be able to hover for as much as you want. And this scenario right here is a perfect example of how you're going to be using your environment to be able to hover longer with the Storm, but of course also have good line of sight on enemies, teammates, etc. I'm going to take out this gatekeeper, but I see that there are enemies on the far right side of the map and right in front of me. So I'm just going to drop down with my hover, and I'm going to activate my hover behind this rock right here. So all of the enemies that were right in front of me now either don't have a line of sight on me or have a really small line of sight on me. And basically that lets me, of course, take them out. And yes, guys, the gameplay that you guys are seeing in the background, at least for the Stronghold, is going to be on Grandmaster 1 because I'm tired of loading into Grandmaster 2 Strongholds and having at least 2 teammates that are under-leveled because Anthem doesn't really have a gear requirement cap for their endgame activities. With all of that said, let's take a look at this last gameplay example. This one is just going to be showcasing us, of course, everything that I just talked about. Using line of sight, using your environment, and positioning yourself in areas that are going to set you up for success, right? So I see that I'm getting shot from the back, so I'm gonna dodge into this little area right here, and I see that I'm actually a bit too close to the ground. I'm taking a lot of fire, so I'm gonna hover a little bit over the roof of this area right here, because this is gonna give me a good line of sight on my teammates, on my enemies, but it's also gonna cut off the line of sight for some of the bad guys. As you guys saw right there, the bad guys that I just shot with a fireball, they didn't have a line of sight on me, so they were actually able to force to relocate to sort of get in my line of sight, and that just led to me freezing them and of course taking them out easily with my firestorm. Again, right there, I simply just used positioning and my environment as cover, and of course I also exploited some of the line of sight so that I can get the most out of the situation. And this other scenario is pretty much the same thing. Right here, I'm in a position where the enemies have their back to me, and even if they do start shooting me, my interceptor is also going to be backing me up. So I'm basically in an area where I'm able to hover forever. And that's everything you need to know, guys, honestly, when it comes down to hovering with the storm and, of course, positioning yourself in really smart areas. As long as you have a line of sight on the enemies, as long as you're able to see your teammates, as long as you're able to, of course, use and exploit line of sight on the enemies so that you take less damage and you can hover for a longer amount of time, you're honestly going to be pretty Gucci. That's why I really like the storm. I think it's really simple to understand, but of course, there's a couple of things to master about this javelin. That's what makes it a really interesting javelin. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like and subscribe for more Anthem guides, and please drop this video a like. You know, these videos do take time to make, and your support is appreciated. Peace out. See you guys in the next one.